Good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. But I suppose most people are in EMEA here. So my name is Ulf Andreasson. I work as a senior systems engineer here at Sumo Logic, covering kind of Nordics and EMEA. And I'm going to take you through some of the capabilities we have with regards to application observability in Sumo today. There's actually quite a lot, and we have added and we are adding a lot of things to it continuously, right? So that's why this may not sort of be like a perfect demo where we have all the things, but I still wanted to kind of give you an understanding of what we can do today and sort of how we can handle much of the application observability in Sumo. So with that said, I'm going to cover sort of, first of all, just a bit of basics with regards to Sumo, but then kind of more look into how we can do quick and effective troubleshooting using Sumo features like service maps and trace and spans and logs. And in the end of it, we're also going to cover off some of the global intelligence we have for Kubernetes, and I'll let you understand more about that when we get to it. But basically, it's kind of a neat feature we have that can really help you to size and to monitor your Kubernetes clusters as well as your applications in there. So something that we've had very good response from other customers who kind of be using it. So that's basically the agenda today. It's probably not going to take much more than 40 minutes, something like that. But yeah, also, if you have any questions, anything like that, just please post those in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll make sure we cover those. So in general, observability, what we talk about that, or how we talk about that in sort of Sumo is really very much a kind of question of having the right type of data for that specific use case you have. So if you're monitoring, kind of just looking at how the systems are going, just understanding your MTTI and things like that, right? You kind of don't really need all the data, so to speak. You need sort of a lot of metrics. You want to have the kind of dashboard of what's happening. When you want to start to diagnose different sort of situations, then you need a bit more. You need to start to look into like, okay, what kind of events, what kind of other data sources do you have in there? And obviously, when you're really going to go kind of full throttle on troubleshooting, you're going to have all the kind of logs and traces and everything you have, right? So with that said, what we're trying to say, as much as you need to kind of be able to observe and monitor your systems, there's in essence kind of you need different data sources for different sort of use cases, and that's kind of quite important, right? So what we're going to talk about today is actually more about the troubleshooting and the kind of understanding how you can, see things more in detail, so to speak. With that said, Sumo can treat different data sources in very many different ways. So first of all, we have sort of variable retention. We have things like data tiering. So you don't necessarily treat all the data the same. Some data you're only going to search through maybe once in a while. While some data is actually going to be driving your alerts and monitors. So you want to those are going to be the much more kind of important ones, which you want to look at all the time, right? Now, Sumo is also a sort of SaaS service. So you effectively, you sign up to Sumo, you get an account, you log into the portal and the user interface. And then what we want to do is kind of collect that data. Sumo itself runs within AWS, and we sort of fully cloud native, modern type application, running everything in Kubernetes and sort of using all the kind of cloud features that basically AWS provides. Now, that doesn't mean that we are not able to kind of look after more kind of on-prem type solutions or very, kind of older type technologies, right? So we do that as well. It's just, for us, it's just a question of collecting that data. So for the kind of on-prem systems, we're using install collectors, which basically is, we call it collected, but effectively like an agent, kind of collecting the data and pushing it into Sumo. But we can use many different ways of doing that. So we're not restricted to kind of using the Sumo collectors. If you prefer to push data to us using a Fluentd technology or any other technology, that can be done as well. So there's a lot of kind of capabilities there. What we also can do is use webhooks and API to collect data. So we kind of, if there's a REST API defined, like in Okta, for example, we can make use of that to really kind of push to actually more go and pull that data. And likewise, so with the event hub there, we can kind of pull the data from the event hub. On the AWS side, we're sort of using, Kinesis Firehose or different sort of putting data into S3 buckets. So there's a lot of different sort of capabilities here and a lot of different ways we can do things. Just to kind of make it simple for you. And one more thing is that when we're looking at collecting sort of data from a Kubernetes cluster, when we're collecting data from an AWS environment, we can actually use kind of Terraform templates or, Helm charts, CloudFormation templates, and we can sort of start to collect all the different accounts you have in AWS, including all the different regions and the different data services in effectively one single CloudFormation template. So that sort of simplifies the whole collection. But basically, that's kind of, collecting the data and putting it into Sumo, that sort of enables us to start to look at like, what can we really give you? And what we do there is, of course, all the kind of different kind of metrics, logs, events taking place. This data is what we typically put into a dashboard, or if nothing else, a search query. And a dashboard, in its most simplistic terms, every panel within a dashboard is driven by a search query underneath. So when you look at a panel, giving you some numbers or showing you like a honeycomb map or something like that, it's basically a search query that kind of pulls out those numbers. And then it's just a question of how do we visualize that? So there's a lot of sort of, much of that data is just a basic search query, but of course we also use sort of different kind of machine learning technologies to really advance this and to find sort of anomalies and outliers to be able to give you kind of more like a benchmark number or explain, a number that if that is a good, bad, or kind of horrible number, right? So if you kind of see that, okay, you get a whatever number of connections, is that good or bad? Is that something that other customers are seeing, or is that something that, that you should be worried about? Those kind of things we're trying to do as well. And effectively, we do those things using different kind of machine learning technology. So there's a lot of kind of things under the hood. And of course, we're advancing this all the time, right? So we're looking at different sort of ways of doing this. But the beauty as well, the Sumo search language has a lot of those operators. So for example, identifying an outlier, it's just an operator. So you can include that in any of the searches that you would do, not sort of having to rely on Sumo to provide the specific feature or the specific sort of search that you're looking for. That's actually something you can do yourself. So I think that's probably enough with regards to slides. I do want to put most of the focus on this here in the kind of demo. So in my case here, I'm having a lot of sort of high latency or I have received a high latency message here in email. And I can kind of see this. This is just a typical alert coming from Sumo when it comes in the email format. You can see what type of query that basically has sort of caused the alert. We can effectively go straight into that query. We can see the trigger value. this value could be sort of driven by standard deviation, something like that. So it's not necessarily like a hard threshold or a dynamic threshold. It could be sort of something that changes, right? So we do want to give you that. Also the trigger condition here, and then the time range, because you may get this in the middle of the night, right? In addition to that, you can actually have a playbook associated with any kind of alerts or monitors, and this you cannot define when you actually set up the alert itself. So there's a lot of capabilities there. And then sort of you have the links into the different dashboards and things like that. Now, you can do exactly the same thing with Slack or Teams or whatever kind of other communication solution you're having. So it would just be the same, maybe not as graphical as the email, but basically you can influence this as well and tell us what you want to see in there, right? So there's a lot of capabilities in what you want to do, right? Now in Sumo, and actually before I delve straight into the kind of alerts and other things we have there, in Sumo, basically, we have this sort of app catalog, and the app catalog has a collection of all the different technologies that we are able to, out of the box, understand and give you sort of dashboards and search queries for, including alerts and other things, right? So basically, if we take something simple like Apache, Apache is going to provide you with, in this case, one sort of dashboard. And when I click on that, I get, or actually, let me show you this one instead. So when you can see a preview of what that dashboard is going to show you. So in this case, you're going to get a map of all the different connections and then sort of some metrics around the web server itself. And there's going to be a number of different sort of dashboards that's going to be part of this, right? So it has all sorts of different information here that could be useful. Now, this is coming out of the box. It is kind of ready-made for you, but it doesn't mean that you can change anything. You can go and you can tweak this. You can do, do different things depending on what you want to do. You may want to just use this for a subset of your data or for maybe all of your data. So there's a lot of flexibility in that, and you can even copy some of these panels. And with regards to the log searches and things like that, you can actually have those searches in here as well. So there's a lot of additional searches here to just kind of find out your 400s or 500s or whatever error messages you're looking for, right? So there's a lot of sort of much capabilities in there, right? Now, Apache is, of course, more of the kind of traditional type applications. What we're looking at more in today's kind of webinar is actually the more modern type application. Maybe Lambdas or Kubernetes or any kind of microservices type technology, right? So in this case, I'm actually looking at my application service view here. And what we have here is kind of a coffee bar application. So I can actually go into this coffee bar application and I can kind of see the different microservices that are running here. And effectively the kind of the different components to this, right? So I have all, the coffee bar service is effectively a coffee machine where I can order coffee in. It has a lot of different aspects to it, or a lot of different functionalities to it. It has a calculator service that basically sort of calculates what you're going to pay for it. You have some sweets function. So not only are you going to be able to order some coffee, you can actually order some sweets as well. And then, of course, it has the machine service that really kind of brings together all the things about like, okay, you're going to sort of make sure you have some coffee grains in the machine. You're going to have some water. It's effectively going to do the coffee for you when that happens. And then it has the front end as well, which are basically driving the website where you're going to go in and actually order the coffee from. Now, for all of these different sort of microservices, you're going to see different kind of, metrics which we think you should be of interest in. So, for example, the latency service here, the number of requests, the error percentage, and you can also visualize this like in a histogram or kind of in a bar chart where we can actually alert you about anything that could be of interest. So in this case, we do have an outlier here. You know, looking at the coffee machine, we have an outlier here as well. So basically, there's a lot of kind of load is coming onto a system or something like that, right? Here we actually see a much higher error percent to this, right? So that's a bit of a kind of interesting one. Now, there's a lot of different ways I can look at this. So not only do I have my service overview, but I can also look at my application service health, which are basically looking at this from, oh yeah, sorry, that was the application service health, which we looked at before. So anyways, let's kind of go into a service map instead, because looking at it in a table like that or in a dashboard like that is one thing. But what I can do is I can actually go in here and look at the service map and to kind of see things live as they are running, right? Now, you can see the different microservices, how they communicate to each other and what's happening here. As I said, I do have sort of a front end, which I'm actually using to actually, let me see, I can't remember if it's, no, sorry, that's not the right one. But anyways, so I do have my front end here that basically connects into the coffee bar application, which then connects to the coffee bar machine and the machine service. Then I also have the cache disk, which is actually connected to Postgres database, where we have the accounts and where we basically do the kind of financials of the machines. This kind of Postgres machine or database is not actually part of the microservices monitoring, as in the tracing, but it's still sort of a service that's kind of connected to these. So that's why you see a cloud here, and just indicating that it's being monitored, or we know about its existence, but it's not necessarily being sort of traced or kind of you know, really instrumented. But the thing is that we can see all these kind of different components. Now you see the kind of suites function as well, which basically is being used to kind of you know, handle the suites if you buy any of those. Those are not sort of necessarily part of this because of architectural reasons, and we added that much later. And it's but it will be sort of baked in here. But basically, there's still a service that's labeled within the Kubernetes environment to be part of this application, right? Now, what you see here is basically the size of the circles is depending on the number of requests. And then if you do have any red circles around them, that basically means that there's been sort of an anomaly. And in most cases, it's going to be latency anomaly, because that's kind of what we're tracing here, to be honest. Now, all of this can be changed here. So we sort of do automatic anomaly detection here on the worst case. But you can also do your own sort of anomaly detection here and specify what you want to look for. So there's a lot of flexibility in the system, and you can really highlight this to kind of make sure you don't get too many false positives and anything like that. Hoping that makes sense. So now, if we want to investigate this a bit further, what I can do here is I can just click on any of these objects here. You see, I get the machine service, which is part of the application, and I can sort of look at this from like wherever I want to do. What I could do is I could just go into log search and I can see all the logs, or I can go into metrics and I can see all the metrics that's related to the machine service. Given that this is microservices type application, what I do want to do here is kind of look at the traces. So I can now, I see my coffee bar front end here connecting to my coffee bar application. And effectively what I also would want to filter on is any kind of number of arrows here, and any number of arrows which is higher than 0. So effectively, if I have any traces where I have sort of some kind of arrow messages within, and I'll just take the kind of top one here. Here you can see my complete sort of trace. The first part of this is effectively what's coming from our browser. So in Sumo, you can really kind of use the real user monitoring, which really kind of investigates and understands what you do on the browser side. So collecting those kind of JavaScript actions and stuff like that into Sumo, you do that. Then we start to look at what happens within my application environment. And in that, sort of, I have all the different components of these things here. So here, for example, you can see the order, which is then posting to client, and it goes further down here, right? Now, this is a kind of fairly busy slide. But what I can do, if I want to focus on seeing the error messages, what I can see here is that my sort of service that really causing all these kind of errors within the system is this process called post get water, or water service. Now, within here, I can see what sort of service this is. I see the status of what I see here, and there's a lot of information. When I look at the metadata, I can also see the application information, the Kubernetes information, and also some of the Sumo metadata we have in there. And as you saw before, it's all kind of part of the application here. But I can pivot from this trace or from this specific span into any other entity within the system if I have a reason to do that. Now, what I want to see here is, of course, what's causing this problem. And the best and easiest way that you typically will see this is, of course, to look at the log lines. Now, I could sort of go in here, I could sort of open this up and go into log search. But given that this is a microservice application, and we are tagging all the log data that goes into Sumo, not only with like what host is coming from and other things like that, but in a microservices type application, we also tag in with trace ID and span ID. And this is kind of a one setup. You kind of set this up within the Kubernetes environment, and then every log that goes into Sumo is going to be tagged with this. Because the beauty of this is that if I look at the logs that are tagged with this specific span ID, and this specific span ID is effectively this instance of the service here, then I'm going to do log search, and I can see that the reason why this is failing is that there's not enough water in the system. You know, conceptually very easy to understand, and definitely something I want to sort of remediate or fix. But the beauty of us being able to find this and to go into the kind of level of details there in that quick way, I mean, that's really what we kind of want to give you, and what customers are really liking in using Sumo. And I hope that makes sense. So there was a number of different steps, but basically starting from the service map, going into trace view, looking at the trace itself, and effectively going from that span of that trace into the log search. That's kind of a very quick way of being able to identify any issues like that. Now, if I had my front end, I could have gone in, actually ordered a coffee, seen the trace ID that's being generated in my browser, and then be able to search for that trace ID as well. So that's a completely different way of doing it, but that would be equally easy to do, right? So that's kind of one way of doing it. Now, the problem with a microservices type application or environment is that you're going to get loads of traces, loads of spans. So what we've done there, and you know, we really think of traces and spans, or at least spans, very much like log lines. You know, you're going to be generating lots of different spans for all your traces in your applications. So one thing that you can do in Sumo is actually investigate the different spans you see coming in. And there may be multiple different types of spans. So what you can do here is that, first of all, we can look for a specific service. something that's equal to, in this case, let's take the cache disk. Now, with the cache disk, I can say that what I'm looking for here is actually the duration, average duration of that. And I want to group this first of all by time. So I'm going to time slice this in 1 minute. And then I want to see the HTTP status code. And that's pretty much it. And I'm going to do this for the last 15 minutes, but it could be for any sort of time horizon or time range that you're looking for. Now, when I click on this search, I'm effectively going to get all the messages or all the spans that are either okay or sort of not okay. And here in the field browser, I can see the different sort of metadata tags that I could be looking for. So it could be many others if I want to either filter by it or do other kind of operations. Now, when I go in to look at the aggregate of this, I will effectively see this as a different kind of, time series data, and I can change the visualization of this. So maybe I want to highlight this. And of course, what I'm looking for are kind of things like this, where suddenly for what is it, 11:24, so like 4 minutes ago, I basically had a very high spike of 402s. And, obviously, this is something that I may want to investigate. Now, if I sort of open this up to be the last 24 hours, I may see that this is kind of something that, regularly happens. That was news to me, but a lot of 500s here happening. What is that? So 1 o'clock in the night and 9 o'clock. So obviously something that I didn't realize. And the beauty with this is that this is not looking at the application. This is actually looking at the traces or spans coming into us, right? So there's a lot of different things I can find here. What I looked at before, or what we saw before, was basically this. But you can kind of use this to be able to look at any kind of time range in here where maybe things would be of more of interest, right? So this is just beautiful because having that capability of being able to kind of look at the different spans and look at all the different spans for a specific service, that may give you a different way of kind of visualizing this. Now, not only can you kind of do that in the span view here, what you can do is effectively open up this in the log search. What we, the data is going to be roughly, or it is going to be the same. It's going to be presented a bit differently. But, this could be kind of something that could be useful in that sense. Now, of course, what you could do here as well is that if you have sort of logs associated to this, or if you have any other data that you want to correlate with your span data, that's where this can be really useful, right? And the more sort of textual data you have in the spans, the better it can be, because then it does become more of a log search. So there's different kind of capabilities like that. Now, so that's kind of really, an incredibly useful thing that many of our competitors can't actually do that today, right? So that's kind of a beautiful thing. Now, what I've showed you is kind of very much out of the box what you will get here. Now, if you want to go and create your own dashboard, for example, what you can do here is you can put a service map into the dashboard or a trace list. So, not only are you going to be able to visualize your logs and metrics, you can actually visualize your kind of your tracing data within the application space as well, or also within the dashboards and your application views as well, right? So you can create your kind of completely customized dashboards and sort of populate that with any data that you think would be of useful. Yeah, so let me see, that's pretty much what oh yeah, sorry, no, one more thing. Now, this is not going to be a great one to create a monitor of, but effectively what you may want to highlight here as well is that once you have a search query of any kind, you can create a monitor of that search. And yeah, sorry, you can't do that based on that search. But let me go into the monitors here. So in Sumo, we have sort of different monitors can be created. Now, of course, if you're running in a Kubernetes cluster or an AWS cluster, there are already sort of monitors out of the box. These are kind of installed when you effectively start to collect and install the integration for it. So it's easy to kind of find that, right? So if you have sort of out of memory killed containers, you can be alerted when that starts to kind of creep up. Now, the only reason why this is not enabled is that we need you, of course, to tell us how we're going to alert you. Is it going to be an email, or is it going to be through a Slack channel or something else? You know, you can open up a Jira ticket for it or something like that. So there's multiple ways you can handle this. With alert, it's the same with searches. You can base an alert or a monitor on logs or metrics. The detection method could be static, or it could be based on an outlier. Sorry. Sorry, hopefully that's going to be better. Yeah, so there's multiple different ways you can do that. Not only can you do that in this way, you can also have multiple queries where effectively what you're looking at is a kind of result of two different queries. So here we're calculating two different values and then we're summing those up. So there's kind of a lot of capabilities in here. Now, when you want to look at what's outstanding alerts you have, you're of course going to get the kind of send to your Slack or whatever it is, but you can also kind of see that within this alert monitor, where you effectively have all the data coming in here, right? So when I click on this coffee bar application, I see the alerts here, and there's a metric that's been spiking, and this is kind of what emailed me, or the reason for the email to me. And then I can go into that metric search as well, or I could look at some of the more context. Sadly, we didn't have much more context for that. But I can also see sort of related alerts. So anything that's kind of related to that same entity, or if it's kind of related in time. So there's been a lot more alerts here with regards to the same time frame. But I can also look at the monitor history here. So effectively, how often does this monitor actually fire something? You know, has it been lately? There's been a lot more alerts than compared to like a week ago or so. So obviously something's developed quite highly here. So yes, that's very much what I had on the application overview, so to speak. Any questions there? Or actually, there is one question here. Is there a guide to integrate applications to Sumo? And yes, there is. There's effectively, you know, just take that as an example. If we talk about, let me take Apache, or we could take anything, but basically in here, in the app catalog, you're going to have the kind of preview and you're going to be able to add this, but you also have this learn more tab or learn more link, which basically talks about how you're going to collect the data. First of all, it talks about what we're trying to do, what type of logs and metrics we're trying to collect, and what you're going to be able to see. But then basically we say like, okay, how do you collect the logs and metrics for Apache? And then there's a full section, step-by-step functions in what you need to do to be able to collect that data to make this application work for you. So, you know, you can collect data in many different ways. When you're going to use out-of-the-box applications, because we've created those kind of dashboards and views, we expect certain data to show up. And that's when you kind of really follow these steps. Now, you could just collect any data and push that into Sumo. We can create customized queries and stuff like that as well. So there's not kind of strict rules, right? But basically, that's what we kind of do for that. Now, if we're looking for a more complete solution, like, for example, the observability solution, so take AWS observability. If I want to kind of deploy that, you just basically go to this kind of deploy the AWS CloudFormation, and then you have the URL here that's really going to take you to the Amazon console and kind of start that CloudFormation template. If you want to deploy using Terraform, you can do that too. It's just going to be a couple of different steps and more sort of aligned to what you do with Terraform. But basically, that's kind of that's what it's going to be like. Hoping that's kind of helps you, and any other questions, just let me know. There's one other question here as well, talking about the how we sort of charge for this, and from a Sumo perspective, is pretty easy. The main thing that we charge for is effectively the amount of data sent into Sumo. So when we look at applications or logs, it's basically going to be a gigabyte per day number, so to speak. Now, there's different ways of handling that, and we're using kind of a credit model where basically there's no overages, there's no extra charges or anything like that. Any data that comes into Sumo is just kind of data. There's no custom metrics or anything like that. And basically, you can set your own retention. You can decide how long you're going to keep the data, what data you're going to have, what data tier you're going to put into. So there's a lot of different capabilities. But in essence, the amount of gigabytes, when it comes to logs and traces, and the number of metrics that you're sending into Sumo. Now, how many users and things like that it doesn't matter at all. You can be hundreds of users or just one user. The amount of data is what's kind of the most important thing. So I have one more thing that I wanted to kind of touch on. Because one thing that we have in Sumo, given that we are a SaaS service, our customers can actually help you to understand your environment. And this is something that we have sort of created and called the global intelligence. So the global intelligence, in the way that all our customers, which are more than kind of 2,000 customers using Sumo, they give us sort of anonymized data. They can tell you, your threat posture, your kind of Kubernetes configuration, all these different things, depending on what you're looking at. In this case, I'm just going to kind of quickly show you with regards to Kubernetes, because one of the business problems with Kubernetes is to really make sure that you're using your sort of resources in the best possible way. And trust me, Kubernetes is 10 times better than what we had like 10 years ago when you had physical servers and all that. But still, there's always a question of like, have you sized it correctly? Have you put your request and limits in at the right level so that you're not overcommitting or undercommitting or anything like that? I mean, the out-of-memory killed containers, for example, which you saw in the alerts, that's kind of something that's still sort of relevant. Now, we want to kind of be able to show you where you are and what you potentially could do to better yourself in that sense. And this is kind of really what the global intelligence for Kubernetes is helping you with. And it kind of probably sounds more complicated than what it is. But effectively, this is kind of the business problem where we see that many of our customers have. And trust me, we can see that Kubernetes is increasingly being kind of used, is increasingly being used in production, and more customers are kind of really pushing the limits on Kubernetes. But it's this kind of question of like, how can you make sure that you're balanced in a good way from sort of a risk versus a cost? And how that looks like in Sumo is that basically within my folders here, I have this application called Global Intelligence for Kubernetes. I can kind of just look at a quick summary here on the adoption stats. Not really that useful, to be honest. I mean, I'm just going to see that, okay, I'm running almost the same number of clusters that other customers are running, but I have a lot more sort of deployments than what other customers are having. Anyways, what I really want to be able to see is how am I configured in general, because this one is not taking into account any specific sort of clusters or anything like that. It just basically says, when I look at the configuration of my Kubernetes environment, I actually have a pretty high memory risk here. So that means that I actually utilizes my memory to a very high degree, maybe too high, because I'm already up at like 94%. Now, if I go in and I'll be more specific, so let's take the coffee bar application we looked at. It actually looks a lot better, so I'm not too far off there. But then I could say that I'm actually looking at a specific, and didn't we have, we had the cache disk before, right? And that now I can play around with these numbers. And let's say, you know, in this case, I'm saying like 100% of all the data that comes in is actually good data. Let's say that I only had 10% of that data. And I was expecting to see some other numbers. Okay, but let's see, or actually, let's do like this. Let's kind of go back to where we were because we have the high risk percent there. And so, yeah, you can see the numbers have gone down slightly here, but if we say something like 40% or so, we're still having very high risk percent. Now, what I can do here is that, of course, I want to have an action plan. And given that we're looking in memory, and just to show you, first of all, we're looking in memory, but we're also looking at CPU here. So same thing, like how much slack do I have? What is my risk? If I want to be balanced, optimized, or reliability optimized, then I can see different things. Now, if I want to have an action plan on this, I want to go in and say, okay, if I want to be balanced view of this, this is not going right. But yeah, what I wanted to show you is that basically, okay, so here's my different services when we look at the coffee bar application. If I want to be balanced, what I have today is kind of what I'm currently using from a memory request. What I could be using is kind of a recommended of 81 megs instead of 400 megs. And you can see, I mean, most of my services are actually quite well balanced, except this one, the hotel collector. So that's actually down to Sumo. This one, the coffee bar clicker, and the coffee bar frontend. So I could be lowering my memory requests here. Now, from a limits, it's slightly different. It's still the hotel collector. The coffee bar clicker is also fairly high. But so these are kind of more important in the way that, you know, if I did have sort of very high memory limits, I'm effectively wasting a lot of resources, right? So not only we're telling you this, we're actually also giving you the recommended value you can actually use to kind of put in there. So that's actually quite useful because now you can take this value, go straight to your sort of Kubernetes configuration and actually put that value in there instead of what you have today. So this is just one way of showing you like your number is 42. Is that good or bad? And in this case, it would actually be like, okay, if it looks like this, it's actually quite bad. But if it looks like this, then actually you know, it's not too bad. So that's really to kind of give you some actionable insights into what you can do and what you can kind of change things for. Hoping that made some sense. I know it's kind of a bit quick and I'm speaking quickly, but yeah, that's kind of where we are. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but yeah, I mean, that said, If you don't have anything more, I just got two more things. Sumo is, of course, going to be part of the reInvent. We're both going to be in Las Vegas. So if you're there, feel free to kind of come by. If you're not, then we are, of course, going to be online as well. So, going to sumologic.com/AWS reInvent, you will kind of see the whole thing there, right? There's also a possibility for any of you to kind of just go into the sumologic.com website, open up a free trial, and you can actually get going with all the things I've talked about today pretty much immediately. I mean, it just takes kind of 10 seconds to sign up and get an account. Then, of course, we're going to have to make sure you're getting some data in there. And of course, the most simplistic way is to start with your laptop or something. But having Kubernetes cluster or having sort of an AWS environment is pretty easy to kind of just run a Helm chart or run a Terraform template to kind of collect that data as well. So with that said, my email address is here. If you get any questions, anything like that, reach out to me or to any of my colleagues around the world. Happy to help you. And thanks a lot for taking your time today.